Welcome to the Gray Range Podcast. My name is David Roussel. We're going to explore the poetry of how we live, how we learn, and how we find our way along this strange path we call life. If you are curious about people, their stories, and all things savage and wonderful, join me on the Gray Range. Excellent. Welcome to another episode of the Gray Range Podcast with myself, David Roussel, and my co-host, Lucas Orich. And today we are joined by Mr. Mel Siggelkow, is it?
Siggelkow.
Siggelkow.
Very close, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure on the pronunciation.
Yeah, no, that's good.
Excellent. And you are executive director, is that correct?
Yes.
With the Rising Above Society here in Grand Prairie.
Yes, with Rising Above Ministry. And
okay.
So we are a faith-based addiction treatment facility here in Grand Prairie.
Right. Excellent. No, that's fantastic. That's kind of what, when I started to look around at who did I want to talk to or who could we talk to in the community, unfortunately, there are few things as ubiquitous in Grand Prairie as addiction. It seems to touch most people, you know.
Yeah, I think there's a saying around here now that everybody knows someone, and that's referring to somebody who's overdosed and died, but everybody knows someone who has been impacted by addiction.
Yeah,
you're right. Yeah. It's just permeated its way into our culture, and we can't avoid it anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll definitely get into the ministry and how you guys got started. But with the format of our podcast is I'll start with a piece of poetry.
Yeah.
And we'll kind of go from there. And this topic, because I've struggled with substance abuse myself in the past. Obviously, as a writer, that kind of thing it feeds and it informs your opinions and your emotions. So when I started to kind of look at what piece I wanted to read for this episode, I had a lot to choose from, and it was quite diverse. So, I think I landed on the right one.
Okay.
This piece is called Fireflies. I will make a place for you to fall. I will make a space for you to run. You won't need anything at all. When I am done, you will hear my call. At my table, you will always have a place. You will never have to be afraid to show your face. I will do everything I can to make it safe. I will make the ultimate escape. I will take the pain from your eyes. I will strip you out of your disguise. Open up the sky, and maybe you will realize we are more than dying fireflies. I'll wear my soul on my outside. I'll show you that I'm broken inside. So you can hope, so you're alive, so you can leave those old reasons behind. I will do my best to make you smile and forget the world for a little while. Light the dark and color outside your lines. I will show you it's okay to try. We both see the world through the same broken window pane, blinded by the cracks and shattered sights. I will show you how to break that last and final time until there's nothing between you and your life. I will show you how to burn your life until it shines. I will give you more than you can deny. Open up your eyes and you will never fear the night. We are more than dying fireflies. So I think that piece had a touch of hope to it.
It does, very much so.
And I think you couldn't enter into addictions counseling without having some pretty strong hope for people and hope for humanity.
Yeah, like when that piece, as you were reading it, it sounds like you were, and I might need to get you to expound more on that piece.
Sure.
But it sounds like you were in the escape mode, trying to get away from the pain, but at the same time
Right.
carrying some hope. Is that the tension that you were feeling when you wrote that?
Yeah, I think there's a bit of a dichotomy with substance abuse where you're trying. A lot of people are doing it to try and escape.
Yeah.
Be it trauma, be it anxiety, be it the hardship of life, and trying to find this doorway out. And drugs and alcohol do provide that for a time before they become a weight and a shackle on their own. And then you're looking for an escape from that. So you're constantly kind of looking to get away. And I think this piece kind of talks about there's the tragic escape into addiction, where we look at life as maybe not meaning so much, where we can we know that there's a spiral. We know that there's a situation where when someone's in a substance abuse situation, when they're dealing with that, and one could say it'd be the same thing if they're with any kind of psychological distress, where they're trying to get out of it and they're stuck in there, and they kind of resign themselves to it a little bit, where they say, well, maybe I'm not that valuable. I'm not worth fighting for. Like I have this problem, and that's just who I am. And if it kills me, it doesn't matter because I don't matter. But then once you get a glimmer of hope, for me, that was part of it was I do matter. I am loved. I am supported. And then all of a sudden, these things get easier to move away from, and you can be able to find doorways and relationships that kind of help get you out of there.
No, I think that's very true, David. When you said that, it's like we're dealing now with a lot of overdose and deaths by overdose, and a lot of people are willing to use, knowing that every time they use, they run that risk that this could be the last one. This could be the overdose. Not intentionally looking for that, but just as you said it, there's a state of despair and hopelessness that, oh well, if that happens, oh well, and that's kind of the attitude that allows them to live at what we would call a high risk level, knowing that if they use this time alone and nobody's there with an naloxone kit, that this could be game over.
Absolutely.
Well, and the drug supply too. I've got a few, friends in the RCMP, and I called one of them a while ago. It'd be a few months back, and I asked him. I said, "Hey, what's in the latest supply? Like, it looks different. You can't help but notice it. You drive around town and you see the way that people are behaving that are on these drugs, and they're all hinged over at the waist, basically forehead stuck to the pavement kind of thing." I'm like this is a little bit different than what we've seen before. And he said, well, there's meth in the fentanyl, there's fentanyl in the meth, and now there's benzos in it, and that's what's making them hinge over, and it's really messing it up. And we sort of talked about the drug supply, and it's just getting more and more dangerous, I guess, for lack of a better term. And it's killing people.
It is. It's killing people, destroying families. Yeah. Absolutely.
Sure. Absolutely. Hey, Mel, I'm just going to get you to turn the mic just so it points towards you a little bit.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Feel free to angle it just that way it's picking up the sound the best. So I have a kind of a common question. I think it's just that me being curious about people, but I like to ask all the people that sit in that chair, what does your perfect day look like? If you had a day where you got up and you had the time to spend it on the things that you loved, and it was a day that you had to live over and over again, what would that look like for you? So
there's two immediate different perspectives that come to mind. One perspective of a perfect day for me would be a hike in the mountains to a waterfall.
You'd be surprised how often that comes up.
Is that right? For me, I love mountains, I love waterfalls, I love nature, I love being out there. And then the other side of it, probably because we're just having this conversation around addiction, is sitting in a room with somebody who has lost all hope and helping them turn that corner where they can discover hope again in their life in the midst of addiction. There's nothing more rewarding or fulfilling that brings a sense of satisfaction to my heart than to be journeying with somebody through that transition. So I go on both sides as soon as you ask that question. One, I guess, is more work-related. One is that if I have a moment of leisure or time away, that's what I like to do.
Well, there's no saying you couldn't fit them both into the same day.
They could both be part of the same day.
You know, you could have one in the morning and one in the afternoon.
Or we're walking out there together having that conversation.
Say, maybe that person needs to go for a walk.
Absolutely.
Right?
Exactly.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's great. That a lot of our guests, I don't know, maybe it's just a function of the people we're talking to, but talk about the outdoors as being part of that perfect day. And I love the idea of you know, being with somebody who really needs somebody. I think as I get older and I get a little bit more in touch with my values, one of the things that I love to see is that victory over struggle. So when somebody is you know, they're going through a hard time and they come out and they start to succeed, or they put their nose to the grindstone and they find the discipline to work on something, work on themselves to become a better person, to overcome something. And then they start to come out the other side of that and see that benefit or the fruits of their labors. And they go, that light bulb moment, they're like, oh, if I would have, you know, I could have been doing this the whole time. Yeah. But those small victories, those small human victories become this thing for me where I just love to see that.
Yeah, that's pretty huge. And we get to see it. We get to see it on a regular basis in the work that we do. And that's what keeps us going. You referred to what's happening on the streets, Lucas, and there's those that serve in that capacity in downtown Grand Prairie, and they don't get to see the successes because they're dealing with the people that are in their chronic addiction day after day after day.
Right.
We're on the other side of that. We're dealing with those that have come to that place of hitting their bottom and they're going, I'm ready to move forward. And so when they come to us, they're ready to initiate some changes in their life. So we see some hope that keeps us going. But I know a lot of people that have worked in some of the organizations that work alongside the chronic homeless day in and day out, and it's waning on them. It wears on them.
Yeah, it's soul crushing work.
It is soul crushing work, and it takes them out after a year or two because they just can't keep going. Whereas we see hope and transformation, and so it keeps us going in a positive way.
That's awesome. Yeah. So you started in 2007 out of a need. This is kind of, I poached it off your website because I wanted to have some relevant questions. Out of a need for treatment options in Northern Alberta for drugs, alcohol, homelessness, criminal activity, gambling, porn, anger, etc. Like the list goes on and on. My question to you, because you're a Christian-based ministry, is what were you doing before that? Like, were you the minister of a church? Are you involved in a church? And is this like, did it evolve into this, or is this a side project?
Yeah, I'll walk you through how we.
Sure, yeah.
I'll actually walk you through how we began. So yes, I was in Grand Prairie. My wife and I moved here with our family in 2002 to pastor a church at that time. It was called North Country Community Church. We were renting space in the Grand Prairie Inn at that time, which is now the Pomeroy there by the mall. That's where we had our church. It was already been there for 5 years before we came. So we were there, and 5 years in, our people are going, we need a facility, we need a building. Sure. We want to have our own home. And we looked around, and kind of a young church, not a lot of money. Through us, this is won't make it that long of a story, but we ended up buying the storefront property right downtown Grand Prairie, right off the corner of 100th and 100th.
Right, the old Swan. Is that when you guys moved to that old Swan City Auctions building, or was that before?
That was before.
Oh,
this is before. So we were down at I can't even say the address. It's not coming to my head, but we were across the street from the pawn shop on 100th Ave.
Okay.
Right downtown there.
Yeah.
It's 30-foot wide storefront building, and we're looking at that and said, we could actually make this work as our church on the main floor and kids' stuff downstairs. It just so it happened that this building had a upper level that was strangely set up because there used to be a beauty college up there. And so they had living accommodations, rooms on either end, a shared living space in the middle, and then a couple of washrooms and one room that had like 3 sinks and 3 showers in it. So it was kind of set up almost like a dorm.
Okay.
Right? And we're going, like, if we are able to purchase this building, what are we going to do with that upstairs? And some of our people were going, well, we need it for the income, for the rent that was there, because there was oil field workers, welders living up there and paying rent. So we thought, we need that just to get us going with the mortgage here. But the conversation was, as soon as we can, we would love to turn this into a ministry center where we can help people get off the street.
Sure.
Well, before all of the legal stuff was done, before the building was legally ours, we were still working through financing that. My wife saw an ad in the paper from the city of Grand Prairie saying we're looking for creative ideas to help people get out of homelessness and back into employment.
Right.
Those were the measuring sticks. And she showed it to me. She says, hey, what if we use that upstairs? If we're able to get that building, what if we're to use the upstairs of it to help people get off the street, give them some classes, give them some supports that they need to get back into employment. So we sent off the letter of intent as they asked for, and the city got back to me almost immediately and said, this is exactly what we're looking for. Can you put it into a proposal? So we did. We put it into a full proposal, sent it off to them, and this is the feedback we got from them. We can tell you never wrote a proposal before, but we love the concept and we want to work with you. So right from even before we had the keys for that building, the doors had opened for us to turn that upstairs living space into residential space for taking people off the street.
Okay.
And so we got the building in June, gave the 90-day notice to the guys upstairs, and by September we were starting Rising Above.
Oh, wow.
With that mandate. So in those days, we weren't known as an addiction treatment facility. We were an organization that was taking people who were chronically homeless. That was the word that they had to be, chronically homeless, helping them get a place to live, sustain that, get back into employment.
Classic church work then, kind of.
Exactly. Yeah. So it started off as a ministry of the church to do that. And as you would know, when you're working with people who are chronically homeless, you are working with addictions.
Sure.
And so
mental illness and
that became then the focus was the addiction side of it. And so, it started as a ministry of the church, and it grew from there. And I was left with, after a couple of years, with a bit of a personal struggle between the demands of the church and the demands of Rising Above.
Okay.
And we just happened to be away at my daughter's wedding in Ecuador, of all places. Get as far away as we can to really process this stuff. And what came to my mind was, where's my passion going? And that was an easy question for me to answer once I was removed from the day-to-day situations of life. And my passion's going to those people and their addictions and helping them walk through that. And I recognized that I was neglecting my responsibilities as a pastor. And so as soon as I weighed that out, it became an easy decision, and came back and kind of resigned from that side of it to serve wholeheartedly into Rising Above, and the organization's just growing. And
I think it's just pastoring in a different capacity.
That's exactly what it is. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, where you'd be looking at, the classic leading from the pulpit to, leading from the ground, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. So I'd like to, maybe take it back a little bit. Where did you grow up, and where did your passion for ministry come from?
Grew up in Saskatchewan.
Okay.
I call Moose Jaw home. I lived there for many years. So this is one of the questions that I get asked. Typically, people who do addiction treatment work have a story of their own addiction.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. I don't.
Right.
So I grew up in a very conservative Christian environment, actually very conservative, that both sides of my family, my mom's and dad's side, were basically all embedded in church life. All of our social connections growing up, my dad was also a pastor. All of our social connections were embedded in church life. I was never exposed to, as a young person growing up, alcohol, drugs of any kind. And remember working at Canadian Tire while I was in college, Bible college, preparing for more church ministry, of all places.
Right.
So I was working at Canadian Tire, and as about an 18 or 19-year-old young man, went to the Canadian Tire Christmas party, and there was open wine bottles on the table.
Okay.
For me, that was culture shock.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. That's how structured our life had been up to that point. For me, that was like, I don't know, sure. Am I supposed to sit at this table? Is that
right?
It was just a difficult, confusing place. So that's how I was raised. And so I say it's almost a miracle that I can sit down with any of these people that have lost everything to an addiction and find a deep point of connection and trust and respect, mutual respect.
Right.
It's not that they respect me, but I respect them and their journey and can walk with them. And so I just say it's a God thing that he did in me that allowed me to be in this position.
Well, and I think it's easy to respect that. In my mind, it takes a tremendous person to not fall to those temptations that are prevalent and chronic in society. Yeah. I think it takes just as much character to do that as to, you know, the people that do hit rock bottom and find that glimmer of hope, and that's probably why you connect with them, because it's, you know,
when we see them hit, like you said, rock bottom and get to that place, and they're so comparing this with church work, which I was very comfortable with in my background, and then seeing the vulnerability of these people when they hit rock bottom and the honesty. I wish I could say that was normal in church world to see that level of honesty, but it wasn't, and it isn't. Right. And so I think that's what really drew me into these people that hit the rock bottom with addictions, to see their raw honesty. I need help. I can't do this on my own. You know, like step 1 of the 12-step program.
Sure.
And to see that just draws you in, and to see their readiness, their honesty.
Yeah, we've talked about it before, where the faith-based programs, at least as far as I understand it, seem to have a greater level of success than, say, the psychological or the medical-based treatment programs, or even some of these more high-end treatment facilities. There are people go and spend quite a bit of money to go for a drying out facility or recovery, and there's a lot higher rates of people kind of falling back into their habits and
relapsing.
Relapsing than a faith-based program. These things, as like AA, seem to have a huge amount of support from the people that go through them, as well as a pretty significant success rate.
Yeah, I think statistically you're correct that faith-based programs have a higher level of success rate. Although, honestly, it's one of the questions I don't like being asked, and I get asked it a lot. What's your success rate? Because honestly, my definition of success has changed a lot since day one of Rising Above. And so whenever somebody asks that question, you need to find out first, what is your definition of success? But correct, I think if you just kind of narrow success down, faith-based programs have a much higher success rate. And
I do have a question along those lines, and not about the success rate, but it says it's kind of a 6-month residential program. Yep. And I'm just kind of wondering, from your perspective, is 6 months is that the minimum kind of required amount of time, like for something like an opioid addiction? Does that seem to be like, you know, after 6 months of, you know, drying out abstinence, is that kind of, because I know there's a lot of facilities it's like 30 days and you're clean, and and it seems like they have a high rate of relapse return customers, or not return, because they go on and
like Northern Addiction Center here in Grand Prairie, their main program is a 21-day.
Yeah.
And they know too that 21 days is just the start.
Yeah.
And so they'll often refer people, when they see people in their program that they can go, it looks like this person needs more than 21 days. They will try to arrange it that they can leave after 21 days and kind of walk the block and a half to our facility and start the 6-month program. And so most of those short-term programs, you know, 21 days or 1 month programs, they recognize this is just the beginning of a longer journey. Yeah. Is 6 months long enough? For a lot of people, yes, it is. And for some, again, they would like to have more than 6 months. But I think it's a good round place to settle.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how we ended up there. And when we ended up with 6 months, it wasn't even as much about that's probably what they need to get off an opioid addiction or whatever their addiction may be. It's more, how much time do we feel we need to really have with this person to help change some of their, you know, habits and disciplines and get them back
build some strength back into them, to
get them where they can leave. And one of our values is to help them to be able to leave when they're financially self-sustaining.
Okay.
Right.
So they're not dependent upon Alberta supports for their monthly check. Right.
Yeah.
But they can be they're employable when they leave our program, is one of our goals.
So how did you guys determine the idea that they should be kind of off public support and independent? Was that something from the beginning, or did that something you guys realized over time that?
No, that was from day one, because our funding. So the city funded us for the first 5 years under the funding umbrella that was provincial dollars, but it was called the Housing and Port's initiative, housing and employment initiative. So
Okay.
the mandate was we give chronically homeless people housing with the intention to get them into employment. And so we said, okay, within 6 months, we want to take these people that have been chronically homeless, help them get enough life skills together that they can now be sustaining a job at the end of the 6 months. So employment was the goal from day one.
Okay.
Before we were an addiction treatment facility, employment was kind of the value there. And that's what we were funded to do.
And I guess it is I guess it's not a byproduct of that, but you would have to be sober to be able to hold down a job.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in a lot of the cases, you have to go through regular drug testing to maintain your job and maintain your employability. And so,
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so then 5 years into that, the funding model changed to what now we know as the more harm reduction model, but then it was called Housing First. And provincial mandated funding change that we eventually, after a year or two of that, we lost the funding because we stuck with the model of, so under the Housing First model, you house people without expectation of change.
Okay.
So our model had expectations for change that was supported by the funders when we started it.
Right.
Sober housing, expectations to come to the life skill programming, expectations of seeking employment opportunities. We were expecting these from our people, and if they didn't comply with that, then they couldn't be part of the program. The Housing First model says, no, you don't put any of those restrictions on. You just house people without expectations and hope they will move forward.
It seemed to me without that level of accountability, your success rate would go down.
Very much so.
However you measure it, but it doesn't
Yeah.
seem
Very
like
much
it
so.
would, yeah.
And so we had a choice to either drop our expectations and basically turn into a housing organization, or keep our expectations as a ministry and potentially lose the funding. And we lost the funding in 2012.
Oh, I see.
And so we were basically totally funded. We had over $600,000 a year of funding. And with a month's notice, the city called us into meetings, community social development. The city called us in and said, we hate to do this, but we cannot. We've tried to fit you guys into this square. You guys are the square peg that we can't fit into this round hole anymore.
Okay.
And there was emotion and tears on their side. And one of them even said, we're cutting funding from the program that's making the biggest difference out of all the programs we're funding.
Yeah.
And so they weren't happy with that either. But so we lost all of our funding. And I felt at that point, 5 years into this, that the doors are closing. We have no choice. We have no money.
Right.
We didn't have to raise money before that. And so went back, and by that time we had about 10 staff, and basically gave everybody their notices that loss of funding, end of contract terms,
Right.
will not be renewing. And in my own mind, I thought, I'm going back into pastoral ministry. I'd done that for over 20 years, and I was okay with that. But I honestly look back at that and said, this last 5 years of doing this work with people coming out of homelessness and addiction would be the 5 most fruitful years of my ministry.
Sure.
I was looking back on that already. But I'll say it this way. That was my thoughts. God had different thoughts.
Obviously.
Yeah, we're still here. So some of our board members said we should have a prayer meeting at our by this time we're up in that building that you referred to, Second Chance Furniture building there.
Yes.
Yeah. So by this time we were there. And so we put it on the Christian radio station here, Reach FM. They announced it a couple of times in the afternoon, saying, hey, if anybody rising above just lost their funding, we're looking for what does God have in store for this.
Mm-hmm.
And we just invited people to come, and we had 40 people packed into our little classroom that was built for 20.
Yeah.
Basically, with standing room only in there. And at the end of that prayer meeting, there was a strong consensus from our leadership of our board that's saying, we don't know how this is going to happen, but we know the doors aren't closing.
Okay.
So we immediately downsized immensely to where there was just myself and one other staff person, the one who actually managed the Second Chance Furniture store for us.
Okay.
Downsized just the 2 staff, let go of that where we started, that upper level of the old church building. We had 1 house and 3 beds, and we just plugged away like that for almost a year.
Okay.
And then we had a tough decision to make, and we're going, this isn't working well. we're trying to run a second chance furniture store with 3 guys, and it isn't. We're not doing well at anything here. And by that time, that level above where we started, where we had 10 guys living above what we had as a church back then, was still available. And so the board said, we're going to take a huge step here of faith. We're going to lease that again, and we're going to turn that one house that we had been using back into a women's facility. And we're going to take a step of faith. And within a couple of weeks, both those places were full. And honestly, from that moment, a step of faith that the board took to say, let's see if God is in it, it's been growing ever since. And the funding that kept us going is community dollars.
Yeah.
It's not government dollars, or it's coming from people, businesses in the area that
amazing
believe in what we're doing. So right now our budget is over $1 million a year. 70% of that comes from donations from people and businesses that keep us going.
Well, and I think that goes back to your earlier point about everyone knows someone.
Yeah.
That the community, they can rally behind a cause like that because it is real and everybody does know someone.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, and we saw such an influx of in the oil field when it was really booming. There was a lot of young people that came here, and they had a lot of disposable income, and drugs followed in huge supply. I was speaking to a former RCMP member a few years ago that said at the time that they were active as leadership locally in the RCMP, they said there's up to 8 to 10 national or international organized crime groups working in Grand Prairie at that time, and it was all the drug trade. Yeah. And when we saw things slow down a little bit, it was just kind of a swath of destruction where addiction had set in and drug use had set in to where, like I said, it became ubiquitous. Like if you were a young person and you were working in the oil field and you were out at the bars or whatever, the drug use was so pervasive that it kind of became a running joke about northern Alberta towns and drug abuse.
Well, drilling rigs are run on cocaine.
Oh, absolutely,
and everybody knows it. Like, it wasn't.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think over time that kind of legacy is what we're seeing now, where Grand Prairie's changed a little bit. It's a little bit more of a mature city. There's more young families here. With the growth of things like our new hospital and some of the businesses, we're starting to see people coming here not to escape, not to look for that quick money, but because they actually want to live here. They want to bring their family. They want to raise their family here. But we still have this huge drug problem, which I think now you go to any major city, you see the tent cities everywhere.
Yeah,
it's pretty common. It's almost everywhere. How does Grand Prairie fare, do you think, with some of these other major cities as far as the homeless problem and the drug problem? Is it worse here than in other places?
I don't believe it's worse here than other places. You go to any city in Alberta, or we're actually just July 1st, they're going to be starting a Rising Above program in Peterborough, Ontario. And Peterborough, Ontario, population-wise is very similar. Like they're just over 70, and we're right around 70,000.
Okay.
They have no addiction treatment facility of any kind in that city, and their homelessness population is by far larger than Grand Prairie's.
Right.
And so they're in this crisis without any programs available to really help them as far as addiction treatment goes. And so there is some people that were connected to us, and they're starting a Rising Above there. But just as an example, same size of cities, they have a much higher homeless population, street engaged population than we have.
Okay.
So we see it, and it's real for us, but I think every city right now in Canada, North America, has that issue.
Since 2007, because now you've got quite a bit of history.
Yeah.
Have you seen an increase then in the amount of homelessness and addiction as the years go by? Is it getting worse?
Definitely. And I'm not as engaged with numbers of homelessness.
Right.
I feel like we're one step removed from that. But addiction, yes.
And I
it's
guess
increasing.
just a follow-up question sort of along the same lines. Is it more drugs than alcohol? Like, is it, like, would you say, is it a 50, like, I know alcoholism, like where I grew up, alcohol was a big thing.
Right.
But now it seems like I don't see people drunk staggering around in the streets.
Yeah.
It seems like they're on drugs. And I'm just wondering, is it, I don't know if you could put a percentage number on it.
Yeah. Like if you were to back the clock up 30 years, it would be easy to answer that as alcohol is more prominent than drugs. But but now, no. If you're looking at Grand Prairie, especially people that live in Grand Prairie, it'll be the drugs.
Yeah.
If you go out to some of our First Nation communities, like on the reserves, alcohol would probably still be the prominent drug of choice. But even with the alcohol in our First Nations communities, there would be drugs would be woven in there as well. But alcohol might be the entry level for them before they go into the drugs. But in town here, I would say drugs.
Yeah, and fentanyl.
Fentanyl, yeah. And again, like I said, when you're using your drugs, if buying them on the street, you're likely going to get fentanyl no matter what you pay for, no matter what you think you're buying. Yeah.
Yeah, and these increased overdoses that we see, these deaths of despair, like we were talking about in the beginning, when people, they do lose hope. Yeah. I was visiting, my mom worked at the hospital for a great many years, and she was actually in the hospital for some not emergency care, but she was just sitting in triage. So I went to visit her because she was just there for observation. And the triage area in the hospital just before COVID was basically a section of chairs where you could sit around. And there was a young lady who was there under guard of a couple of RCMP people. And she had overdosed and then been brought in to the hospital. And my mom, having worked at the hospital for as long as she had, she knew these RCMP people and the nurses and all that stuff. So we were kind of talking, and the one female member of the RCMP said, this young lady went to her dealer. Now, the dealer had cut their dope and had known that they had overcut it it was too high of a percentage. So they sold it at a discount. Oh my. And it was gone in minutes. Yeah. So all these addicts, knowing that, like you said earlier,
high risk,
that this was the potential that they would overdose, but they knew that it was a higher percentage of fentanyl or carfentanil or whatever was in there. It was actually more popular.
Mm-hmm. Because it was anyways.
Yeah. So they were just taking it, but that kind of mentality where they're taking Russian roulette with their lives is pretty amazing, and it's such a human thing that we see people give up, that we'd respond to that, but we also turn away from it because we see that in our society where there are tent cities and there are, like you said, people bent over at the waist in the street, more so now, and we want to deal with it. I mean, I think everybody, their hearts reach out, but at the same time, they're afraid. And they want to turn away from it. They're kind of the not in my backyard. And I think an agency like yours, ministry like yours, where you're giving people hope, but not just giving them hope and not just trying to get them off the drugs, but return them to society, return them to some sort of beneficial use to themselves and to society. That's where we as a community, we can look at it and say, hey, look, this isn't something where we're trying to give a hand out to people. We're actually trying to make them better and return them to society where they're contributing members and they have hope again.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what we like to see is people who can, like you said, be a contributor. They're out there, they're working for a living, they're involved. Most of them stay involved in the 12-step rooms, sponsoring others, helping others, but they get involved in the community, and that's what brings life back to them.
And there's a big difference between a handout and a hand up.
Oh, for sure.
How many, hard to tell from the website, but how many residents can your facility handle?
Okay, yeah. So right now, in our what we call our park campus building, the building right by the comp school, we have 19 beds for men. So that's the men's program is in that building. And then we have 4 residential houses for ladies, so 17 beds for ladies.
Okay.
So we have 36 beds in our 6-month program. And then we have a small apartment building that we call for second stage. So once they complete 6 months, there are those that are going, I don't feel like I'm quite confident or ready enough to step out of here into, quote, the real world. So we have a second stage where it's a small apartment building, 8 units, 7 2-bedroom, 1 1-bedroom, so 15 beds, that if there's a space in there, they could rent a bed or a room in the apartment or part of the apartment. Sober living still, with some accountability, but not the same regimented programming that they're in the 6-month program.
Okay.
And so we have an additional 15 beds there. So we have 51 beds right now under our care.
Okay.
And we're
is that enough?
No. So what's happening with the provincial government side, and we've been dialoguing with them on and off for the last, ever since we began actually. But so they just announced a 50-bed treatment facility in the Grand Prairie area coming soon.
Okay.
We've started a campaign that we're going to be breaking ground this summer on building a building that'll increase our capacity by about another 18 beds, mostly for men, because the demand for men is still stronger than the demand for the ladies.
Okay.
And in conversation with the government, we're going, they do 50, we increase ours. It's still not going to create enough bed space for what's needed here.
I wonder, do you think it affects men more because men have less of a support network built in, whereas ladies seem to have a little bit better social structure, I guess, for lack of a...
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. And again, historically, alcoholism originated as kind of a man's thing, and drugs were originally kind of more of a male. Drug addiction was more of a male thing, and so that's still there. And even though I think that it's starting to balance out a bit more, but just based on our wait list, we've always had a much larger wait list on the men's side than on the women's side, and I think a lot of it has to do that women have other options and other support systems available to them.
Okay, I was curious about some of the demographics you guys see. Is it, being that Grand Prairie, you were talking about the First Nations community. What do you see as far as do you see like a higher proportion of First Nations? What's the socioeconomics like? Is it mostly people from lower socioeconomic groups?
So, well, the First Nation one, we've measured that, and typically on any given day, we have about 40% of our clientele are First Nation community. So that's kind of a statistic that works pretty much consistently throughout the year. The economic one, we tend to attract those that are from the lower economic places because, like you said, there's a lot of options out there for addiction treatment if you have the dollars to pay for it.
Right.
And so they will go to these fancier pay per day, pay per month places. But so for ours, it's set up that if you're on Alberta supports, there's no cost to you to come into our program.
Okay.
And so we charge $500 a month for the housing side of the program, and we don't charge anything for the rest of it. So each person that comes in, they pay us $500 a month, and our arrangements with Alberta Supports is that they cover that, and they will still get their allowance for food and clothes and stuff on top of that.
Right. I guess that makes sense since kind of your guys' genesis was from housing the homeless and kind of returning them back to the workforce. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So one of our values is we want to have our program available to anybody where the dollars are not a barrier, where finances would not keep somebody from entering into our programming. So
that's awesome. Fantastic.
Yeah.
I guess this is probably a big question. So if somebody comes to you, they finally decided that they need help, and they've met the entrance requirements, and they get there. What does that 6 months look like? If you had to, I mean, briefly, you don't have to get right into it, but like, what does that 6 months look like for?
Sure. So basically the entry requirements are the $500 a month. They have to have the plan for that. Again, Alberta Supports, if they're an Alberta resident, takes care of that. Second entry requirement is we have to hear from them in some form, in some way. Some way they need to say, I need help with my addiction. We get a lot of people that I ran out of places to stay. I can't couch surf anymore. I need a bed.
Okay.
We want to hear more than I just need a bed. We want to hear I need help with the addiction. So we're listening for that in the conversations we have before we admit them. And then they need to be 7 days clean. So we are not a detox facility. We're not staffed or equipped for that. And so they come through Northern Addictions Detox there for their 3, 5, 7 days or do it at home, wherever. But they need to be 7 days clean. Then once they come into it, our programming, that the expectations, requirements of our program add up to about 25 to 30 hours a week that then they're committed to. So they do have some flex time. And we're not, again, lots of different models out there for addiction treatment. We're not a lockdown facility. We don't take their cell phone from them. They don't have to spend the first month inside. They're at some point in time, they need to learn to walk out of the building and walk back in and stay safe doing that. And so we kind of say from day one, that's what we want you to do. And to put those boundaries in for yourself as you need it. So we do have curfews. For the first month, the curfew is 9:30. After that, the curfew is 11. And basically, we set the curfew at 9:30, basically, so they can go to a 12-step meeting and be home. And then once they've been in, they earn the trust that they can have a curfew till 11, which means you can go out to Dairy Queen after your meeting if you want, kind of thing.
Right.
And we don't have 24/7 staff. So we monitor curfews with cameras on the entrances, even at the ladies' residences. There's cameras on all the front entrances. So we monitor it that way. So again, it's some people come out of incarceration to our program and they feel like this is too much freedom for me.
Sure.
But most of the people go, we valued the fact that you treated us like adults, and we don't have to sign a paper every time we're going to go out to Circle K for a drink, or that you trust us, and there's not 24/7 staff. For the most part, people really value that, and it feels like you're treating me as a human being that can take care of themselves. So there's the main part of our program that comes down to life skill classes, where we teach healthy relationships, boundaries. We do classes on addictions and trauma, and I teach anger and self-esteem, and I do some leadership stuff. But so we do 9 hours a week of life skill classes. That's mandatory. You have to be in the classroom Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday mornings from 9 till noon.
And define life skills. What are they learning?
Well, so those were the subjects that we cover. So it's across the map. We actually do stuff on personal hygiene,
right?
And thrown in there randomly. But for the most part, it's relational, emotional health life skills.
Okay.
So anger management is when you're dealing with people with addictions, you are dealing with people that have anger issues.
Sure.
I've never had one of them come back to me and said, "You're wrong about me," when I said that in the class. So we deal with the anger stuff, and that's a pretty heavy one that we work through. And so anything to do with strengthening the relationships, becoming honest with who you are, vulnerability. We have classes on pride. We have just a whole spectrum of topics. And then even once in a while, we're back again, shut down during COVID, but we're back again going just up the street to Northern Addiction Center. They let us use their gym.
Okay.
And so once a month or a couple times a month on a Thursday, we'll go over there for a couple of hours, and just part of life skills is to say, hey, take care of yourself physically too. Yeah. But for the most part, our life skills are pretty heavy entrenched on emotional health. Yeah. And it can get pretty heavy at times.
Well, I'm not going to lie to you. In my life, one of the biggest benefits that I had, struggling with mental health, struggling with substance abuse, it was physical fitness. Mm-hmm. Once I started to, because it's easy to, maybe stop drinking or stop using drugs and fill that void with other things that are maybe just as destructive. Food can be one of those. You can replace one bad habit with another one quite easily. And once I started to look at fitness and say, okay, I'm gonna lose some weight. My goal was maybe to lose 30 pounds years ago. And once I started doing that, those mental benefits that I began to find was huge, to the point where it became something that I don't operate well without it. If I take a couple of days off, I find I don't have the mental or emotional capacity that I do when I'm regularly exercising. And I think there's a lot of study on that right now, where if we start replacing some of these negatives with net positives, where we're no longer looking at the substance or the bad relationship or the or even the happy meal for that dopamine, if we're replacing it with good connections, good physical fitness, those kind of things, it starts to build that healthier outlook.
Yeah, and it goes back to what you said when you asked me about what's the perfect day look like. You say you hear that over and over again, going for a hike in the mountains. It comes right back. We all know that feeds us.
Yeah.
On the inside. And so, we make it a point to help our people in their addiction recovery to challenge, especially this time of year. Let's get outside as often as we can. And
yeah, absolutely.
It,
so on a more personal note, how did you guys end up coming to Grand Prairie? So was your whole ministry in Saskatchewan, or did you travel around mission work? Or?
So my pastoral ministry was 10 years in Saskatoon.
Okay.
And then we went to Winnipeg for 5, and ended up coming from Winnipeg to Grand Prairie. And that was, we weren't looking for a move. I was in our denomination. I knew there was a pastor in Grand Prairie that had started the church 5 years ago, and we had connected some. And I found out that he was leaving when we were at some denominational meetings. I found out that he was, and I was surprised by that, because I thought I would have heard earlier, and I was going like, no, I don't think that's true. And honestly, this is in that somebody had said to me, oh, Dana's leaving Grand Prairie, and I'm saying, no, I don't think it's true. I would have heard that. And then inside, I had this little voice or thought come through my head. It's true, and you're going there. and within the next few days at this denominational conference in Olds, Alberta, several encounters came up that one random person just said, hey, Mel, who knew me, want to meet you, this new friend of mine. His name's Will. He's from the Grand Prairie Church. And all of a sudden I'm standing there, just the two of us going like, hi. and I'm not a socially outgoing person by nature. That's not me. And so here I am in this awkward conversation with somebody I didn't know. It turns out he was from, but those kind of,
God's just slapping you around.
Exactly.
Yeah, he tends to send us where we're needed.
Yeah, and so we ended up here on because of the distance from Winnipeg, and our summer there was really full, but we had a young family, and we said if we're going to do something like this, we want to make sure we're here by and be here and sort of get our kids in school in September. We don't want to do a mid-year change for them, and so this was already in June when I had those kind of random thoughts. We came up here for a little visit in July, and just to explore the opportunity, and the church here extended an invitation for us to come, and we ended up buying a house that weekend because the market here at that time was like, don't bother looking at houses now because next week they're going to be gone.
Yeah.
So we ended up buying a house even before we resigned in Winnipeg, and it was all backwards, but that's how it worked to happen so fast. So,
dang.
So looking back on it, and so my first 5 years of pastoral ministry here in the back of my mind, I'm really enjoying this. This is a great group of people, but the randomness of how it happened for us to get here, I think, God, there's something more that you got here. And now looking back at it, I'm going, okay.
Makes sense now.
I don't know why I'm the guy, because like I told you about my background was anything about as far away from alcoholics and drug addicts as you can get. But I'm glad I'm the guy because I'm loving what I'm doing.
Well, apparently we needed you.
Yeah, that's why you're the guy.
Yeah.
We don't get to pick.
No, we don't.
Often we don't. Yeah.
And so, it's been 17 years and it's been amazing.
And how many people do you have on staff now?
There's, counting part-time, there's 12 of us right now.
Okay.
So 8 full-time and 4 part-time.
And you guys, like you said, you draw most of your money from donations from the community. What do you guys do for fundraising? We do 2 major fundraisers each year. We do a banquet in March down at the Tara Center. Okay. This past one, we had just over 750 people come. Oh, wow.
That's crazy. And raised just over $300,000.
Fantastic.
And then in September, we do an all-day on the radio with 96.3, the Reach FM, the Christian station here in town. So from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., they still do the music and stuff and the news, but in between all the songs and breaks, they're live at our office, and we're just chatting back and forth about what we do and interviewing some of our participants, and it's a really fun day, and that generates 100,000 plus. And then it's just in between people just donating and giving. And
do any of your the people that go through the program, have they come back as volunteers or come back as fundraisers? Or
Yep, they come back and volunteer, mentor.
Okay.
They come back in our classroom and share their stories. At our banquet, and when we first did our first banquet years ago, we had a few people share their story, and I remember we sent out a bit of a survey to say, in future banquets, would you like to see some musicians or comedians or some of those things? And they went, no, just tell us more stories.
Yeah.
And so we heard from that first group that that's what people want, and we often hear, like I said, we had 750 people at our last banquet. Those that come year after year, they say they come back because they want to hear the stories.
Well, I think the truth is powerful, and I think it motivates people.
Yeah. So when you hear somebody tell their story of their trauma and their abuse and their addiction, and then all of a sudden you hear them talking about hope, and I'm now enrolled in college, or I'm now working at this place, and it's pretty cool.
I know for myself, I think one of the drivers that made me get in contact with you was recently. I used to live in the south end of Grand Prairie. And before we moved here about 2-3 years ago, and I would drive through the downtown area on a daily basis. Besides the Rotary House and see the tent city and see the people that are there, and it occurred to me one day that we look at these things as annoyances a lot of the time. We're caught up in our own lives. We're commuting. And part of us says, well, I don't want to see that. Or here's this person in the middle of the road who's, in some form of distress or whatever. And in a moment of just complete selfishness, I was thinking, like, this person's blocking traffic. I'm driving home. Here they are. I don't remember. They're pushing a shopping cart, doing whatever. And then something in my head clicked, and it said, you have no idea how close that was for that being you.
Ooh, okay. Yeah.
And I was like, wow,
yeah,
that's true.
Yeah.
Because I used to spend a lot of time in the street. It was only by God's grace in my life that I avoided that. And that instance, if I had have gone left instead of right in that one moment, then maybe that would have been my future. Yeah. And obviously I've come so much further from that, but that was a really big moment for me to kind of a snap back to reality and to say, wow, like, one bad decision or one bad day, like, can mean a lot to people on that. But what do you view, and if you can share, your biggest success stories? Like, is there any that jump to mind when you think about the work you've done, where you say, like, this instance, these people, or this particular individual?
There's lots of stories come to mind, and I'm thinking of one now. He's now living in Ontario. He was part of our program in the early days. He's now a very successful welder, welding these super fancy fireplaces, and so he just posted a picture of one of the fireplaces that they had installed in a new building in Edmonton. I think it's the largest freestanding indoor gas fireplace, and he helped build that. And he's just to see that change and transformation, because he came out of homelessness,
right,
and since has developed a skill set that's sought after across Canada. And so you see some of those stories and successes. And one of our former participants yesterday, I was just kind of leaving there, and I heard some noise down the hall. I didn't realize they were in there, but he had one of our former participants is back after 5 or 6 years of when he was in the program, and he's leading a Bible study with our current participants, and there was 8 or 10 of them in the room just voluntarily wanting to come, and he's doing a Bible study with them and going like, that is so cool. And that particular one is in Bible college now out at Sexsmith at Peace River Bible Institute. And so, there's lots and lots of stories of deep healing and change and transformation that is taking place.
I got a question, because it's Christian based, is that a requirement to get in there, or is that something, like, do you have to be a Christian to get into the program?
Not at all. So
Okay.
basically, if you want to work with us, yes.
Sure.
If you want to be part of our program, no. It's not even but at the same time, we make it very clear for everybody coming that you're coming into a Christian-based program, and Christian values are going to be what drives what we do.
Sure. And that,
So they're fully aware of that. But by far, the majority of our people that come in are not Christian.
okay.
I would say most of them would, if they had to check a box, they would check the atheist box.
Sure. And follow up to that, obviously it's a component there. Is there classes that are, Bible specific or Christian specific that are mandatory or elective or?
Yeah, elective, like
okay.
this Bible study yesterday. And again, that wasn't even a staff driven thing. That was a former participant driven, but it does come through in our classes. They're not Bible study classes per se, but when I teach on anger, which is one of my subjects, I'll often bring in what we call a biblical principle about
Sure.
anger.
Okay.
As a foundation for, and even self-esteem. I use some biblical principles on self-esteem, and so it's woven in there. And then so, for example, when you said about mandatory, we do have a requirement that besides everything that we provide, they need to attend 3 meetings a week. Those could be, they could do 3 Narcotics Anonymous meetings and have that checked off. They could do 1 Narcotics Anonymous meeting. They can go to an outside of our facility addiction counselor and do an AA meeting, or they can go to church. So a church counts as a meeting.
Okay.
And so it's built in to encourage that, but it's not a requirement. They are required to get through 3 meetings, but how they do that is totally up to them.
And would you say that the people that come in and, off the start, they would check the atheist box? Would you say that when they leave, they're closer to God? Like they've...
For the most part, yes.
Sure, yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
You were just saying about how you weave some biblical principles in there, and I was curious when you said you're kind of out of the country and you were trying to make a decision on which path that you were going to take. Was there any specific scriptures that helped you make that decision? Was there anything that really guided you, or as you've gone into this service, is there any particular scriptures that have kind of helped you along and that have inspired you?
There's certainly a number of scriptures that I would say that have inspired me in the work that we do. Even Jesus he's re-quoting from Isaiah, but he says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me. He's anointed me to preach the gospel and bring good news to the poor." And basically the translations would say to those that, so that one translation I think phrases it this way, so that the wretched of this earth learn that God is on their side.
Yeah.
And when I read that in that translation, people, when they're in that darkest place of their addiction, they would say, "That's me." When you talk about the wretched of the earth, that's me.
Yeah.
And one of the things I've learned listening to story after story, when you peel back the layers, and this is what I love to do, even though it's a painful process for the other person, when they peel back the layers, there's always a story behind every addiction. There's always an emotional pain and trauma at the root of every addiction. And that's just not a Christian picture of addiction. Gabar Mate, who is a Canadian medical doctor, addiction specialist, atheist, he says that behind every addiction, there's emotional trauma. And so when we peel back the layers and you get down to that emotional trauma, and they go, "Yeah, I feel worthless, useless, there's something wrong with me, I'm not good enough." And that's the pain that drives them to escape. If you peel back that layer, one layer further, I've heard it over and over again, God's overlooked me. If there is a God, he certainly doesn't know I exist. He's not on my side. And that's the question that comes out of that atheist perspective. If there ever was a God, he certainly is not, he doesn't like me. And so at the bottom of that, where they put themselves in the category of the wretched of the earth, and Jesus says they learn that God is on their side, that God is for them, not against them. Yeah. And that's a driving force, a scripture driving force for me that keeps me pulled back into this.
Is that where you're finding that anger in people? Yep. Is that base level, and is that why that's it's because you've mentioned it a few times now? Is that why the anger part you lecture on that and teach on that. Is that why, like, did that become more important over time to you to hone that part and talk about that piece specifically?
To recognize the anger?
Yeah.
So typically, anger really comes down to it's one of our defense mechanisms. So would escaping into substance abuse, and again, that's a defense. We don't want to feel what it feels like to believe that I'm worthless or there's something wrong with me. I'm a mistake. I'm not lovable. And so rather than own that, we will try to defend and protect ourselves. So we'll escape from it, drugs, alcohol, pornography, whatever it might be, or we will deflect it and blame somebody else. And typically those that have harmed us and hurt us in the past, the abusers, those that manipulated us, or our parents who weren't affirming, whatever it might be, we'll turn it into anger. So it is part of our coping skills and defense mechanisms, but just like an addiction, it feels good at first, but the anger also has a very destructive force in our life. It isolates us from relationships and keeps us from being healthy in our relationships. And so what we think is protecting us is actually holding us back and hurting us with the anger, the same as with the substance abuse or some other form of addiction. So it's all part of our defenses that we build up that protect our vulnerability of those unresolved emotional wounds. And so I'm going to jump back to when you're asking about kind of a day-to-day or what's a week like. We have this thing that we call, our tag for it is inner healing. And that is actually the what makes Rising Above different than almost every other addiction treatment facility is our emphasis on this one piece that we call inner healing. So every week people come, they're just scheduled into their inner healing session. And these people that come in, they don't know what they're getting into, but that's exactly what we're going to do is we're going to peel back those layers, expose that emotional pain, tell us your story. Yeah. And it even starts with present emotion, what's going on now, but you follow that emotional trail back. Where's the first time that you felt unlovable or worthless or not good enough or whatever the lie might be, alone. Where's the very first time that goes back to that experience? And then all of a sudden comes out a story of trauma, of pain, of abuse, of neglect, abandonment, prejudicial stuff, whatever it might be. They're back in this memory as a younger, typically child, 7, 9, 10 years old, and they're living out this, and they're allowing themselves to experience the depths of that darkness. And what that does is that exposes the core of those emotions. It really exposes the beliefs that they're now holding about themselves.
Yeah.
So our term for inner healing, and the inner healing terminology is that's their lie-based pain that they live with. I believe this lie about myself that I'm worthless. Now I'm spending the rest of my life trying to prove it wrong. And all as I end up doing is feels like it gets validated over and over again.
That must be a huge turning point for people to finally get back to the point where they've peeled every last layer off and they've finally been able to put a face and a name. And I mean that figuratively, but a face and a name to what's causing it. That must be a very enlightening moment for a lot of people to that turning point to be able to heal.
Or to uncover that and go, okay, that makes sense. Yeah. But you're not far off when you say a face and a name. That's often what it is. This person took advantage of me when I was a child, or bullied me throughout all these years in the playground, or whatever it might be. Yeah. And so the anger and letting go of that anger is a key part of their healing journey. And then with our inner healing model, and this clearly fits into our faith-based Christian model here, is I could tell them what they need to know. In case of, for example, in case of sexual abuse, which we deal with a lot, when they were first, a person who is sexually abused will often take away from that experience a belief that it's my fault. I should have done something to stop this that I didn't. And they carry that. And even now going into adult years, they've heard people tell them, of course it wasn't your fault. You're only 7. And they go, yeah, you're right. But it doesn't change what they feel about it. And they still beat themselves up over again. So when they're back, they're in those memories of being molested as a child, and they're feeling like I should have done something to stop it. What's wrong with me? Actually, I had a person in my office this morning, and that's exactly where they were at. And they were going, I feel like I'm stupid because I let that happen to me. I should have known better. I should have stopped it from happening. And so at that point, when they feel the extent of that pain, in the inner healing model, we simply say, God, what do you want them to know about that pain? That they feel that they were stupid, that they allowed this to happen to me. And this morning, the person also said it feels like what was the word she used? It was very dirty.
Yeah.
Because of what happened to me.
And I wonder if, because, people, they carry that pain for so many years, and then they develop as an adult. And so now they have they look back with an adult perspective, and now they're trying to apply adult logic to something that happened as a child. And now they're trying to say, like, well, I should have done something about it. It's like, man, you were a kid. You had no choice. There was nothing you could do. So
what we try to do is we try to make them shut off the adult logic.
Okay.
So to sit in the darkness of, as a 7-year or 8-year-old, and I'm thinking back to the person I just worked with this morning as an 8-year-old, what did that feel like to be in that spot? And she embraced that pain of feeling dirty. It's my fault. I feel stupid. I let this happen. I froze. I couldn't call out for help. I couldn't leave. I couldn't. And she's carrying that weight. And in that moment, we simply invite God to bring the truth, because in that moment is where she believed the lies about herself. And in that moment, she's heard God say to her, and I could, like I said, when God says it's not your fault, and she hears it here at the heart, things change. She already knew that logically, and I could have told her that logically, and she would have agreed. But when you hear it here, things shift. And then she said, and then she couldn't stop. She said, this doesn't even make sense. This can't be real. She said she had this picture that she was a princess. Instead of feeling that dirty feeling, she sees herself as a princess. And she goes, I always wanted to be a princess as a little girl, and now I see myself as that. And she's going, it can't be that easy, can it? And I'm going, yeah. When you hear the truth and break the power of those lies, it shifts instantly inside. And that's what we've seen over and over again with people in addiction. When they peel back the layers and are honest enough with their pain and willing to deal with it, that's where it goes.
I can see why they carry that anger too.
Yep. And so part of that journey to get back there was, you have to work through forgiveness to those that abused you or hurt you.
Yeah, when we and speaking from my experience is there's an agency that you lose to your trauma. Mm-hmm. You see yourself as the result of the things that happened to you, rather than something apart from that. So these things happened to me. Instead, it's these things are me.
Yes.
And
so when the healing comes, it's just exactly what you're saying there, David. When the healing comes, that's still part of the story, but it doesn't define you anymore.
Right.
So it's, that happened to me. It's part of my story, but it doesn't define me as I'm dirty because of this.
Yeah.
And you don't carry that it's my fault because of this, or I'm alone because of this. But it is part of the story that shapes who you are today, but it can shape you in a healthy way, not in a destructive way that pulls you into an addiction.
Yeah, 100%. When you separate from that, that's what I meant about agencies, you get that back. Mm-hmm. It kind of puts you back in the driver's seat where you can say, okay, I'm no longer driven by my past. Whatever it was, that happened to me and the choices that I made, and they might have been the bad choices that got me to this point where I hit rock bottom. That does not define me, and you get once you get some of that agency back, and then there's a building that happens, and for me, like I said earlier, there was a spiritual moment. There was a supernatural encounter in my life that brought me from the darkest place I've ever been to, oh my goodness, there's something else other than all this pain, other than all this fear, other than the choices that I had made, which had abandoned basically anything good in life, and said, no, here, this exists. And how often do you see that? Do you see people have spiritual moments that change their lives?
Yeah. I'm going to say all the time, but obviously it's not all the time, because we have enough stories of sadness too.
Certainly a little more frequent in your line of work.
Yeah. But no, it's a very common thing that have that moment of something shifted inside of them. That's a very spiritually significant thing where they heard God say to them something profound, and it shifts how they see themselves. Yeah, that is a regular occurrence.
And how does that make you feel?
Well, when you described to me a perfect day, that's the picture I was describing. in the work setting. That's what brings me
Right.
back to do this day after day after day after day.
Yeah.
Is those moments that keep you going.
And it must outweigh the heartbreak then of some of the.
That's what I was just going to say. And that's what keeps us going is we have those moments. And we also have the other side of it. We've had people that have graduated from our program and died of an overdose within 3 or 4 months later.
Right.
And those are hard things for us to deal with.
Yeah.
But what balances that out is this other side when we see that change and transformation that really does bring hope.
Yeah, well, one of the things that God gives us is joy, and when you look at, drive by a tent city, see somebody, struggling on the side of the street, and try to imagine joy coming from that somehow. I mean, it's a bridge too far for a lot of people, right?
Yep.
But you're seeing that happen. You're seeing that recovery happen, and you're still with the goal of returning these people to a life that's constructive, where they're contributing to their own benefit. I think one of the things that I say lately in my encounters, I think the goal of everyone should be to make better people.
Yeah.
Like that should be our goal all the time. If I'm in my marriage, I want to make myself a better husband. I want to help my wife to be a better individual. If I'm at work, I want my coworkers and the people who work for me, and even the people that I work for, I want to help them to be better. If all of us are looking out for each other and trying to help to make each other better people and strengthen our community, it starts at the individual level, and then the family level, then the greater community level. It seems like that should be the goal.
I think it's hard to snap people out of that. You talked about that moment you had where you're driving along.
Yeah.
You're like, this person's in my way, damn it. And then you're like, wait a minute, what am I, what kind of asshole have I become?
When you think about, and especially in how you finish that story, when you all of a sudden had that flash, I was one decision away or one bad choice away from that could have been me. When that hits you pretty hard, then
And I think a lot of people, they drive by the tent city and they're looking at it as like, well, those people are all going to die, like they're at the end of their life. Yeah. And somebody like yourself comes along and you're looking at those people as like there's hope in every one of those people, and these are all people that have potential and can be. They can be healed and go on to live a successful life. Is your example with the guy that's welding now?
Yeah.
Fantastic
exactly.
stuff.
Yeah.
So if there was anything that you could change, if you had the magic wand, so to speak, if there was anything that you could change about our maybe our communities or our society, what do you think would be the biggest impact to mitigating some of this misery with drugs, with alcohol, with human misery?
That's a pretty heavy question. When you said the word magic wand, if I could have a magic wand and go down to, like you said, down to Wapiti House in that area and wave that magic wand where everybody would have, I guess, the willpower, because this is the barrier. People want healing, and they even come into our program and they want healing, and then they leave because the will to protect their pain is stronger than their desire for healing. So if I had a magic wand, would be to give everybody the will for healing, to say there is hope for me, instead of saying, I don't want to unpack that stuff I got to unpack. I don't think I could handle that. I
put a little piece of forged iron in their soul that they can come back to. Like, I'm stronger than
that. Yeah. But as far as more of a realistic thing, would be this is one of the phrases that we use whenever we do community presentations, and you've heard me say it here today already too, but for people to recognize when you drive down the street and you see that person pushing the shopping cart across the street when you got the green light and they're in the middle of blocking you, is there's a story behind how they got there.
Yeah.
And if we can recognize that, and I've often said this in church settings, that if we recognize that behind those people that are on the streets, that are alcoholics and drug addicts, that if we can understand that there's a story there, it could help us to lose our harsh judgment on them.
Right.
And if we take time to listen to that story, then there will become a depth of understanding that overrides some of our
well, and then help
judgments.
them write new chapters so that their story turns out successful.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that's I think that's part of the victory and part of the message that Jesus spoke of. A lot of people get it twisted about what religion is. When Jesus said that religion is to minister to the widows and the fatherless, and I think it's Mark that talks about faith without works is dead. So I think as individuals, we're responsible for the state of our community. If we don't like the state of our community, it's not the fault of the government. It's our fault.
Well, yeah, man, there's a fine line there. Like, I don't think a safe drug supply, I don't think that's helping anybody in any of these places where it's been rolled out. I think it's easy to point at the government and say, what are they doing? But it's our fault for electing them. I mean, if you believe the system works the way that it's supposed to work, but I don't, like, in your opinion, is a safe drug supply, is that helping anyone?
No. So the whole harm reduction model, which leads into the safe drug supply, comes out of very compassionate people. And I know a lot of them have family members that are kind of leaning that way very heavily.
Yeah, and I think the idea comes from a good place.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. The hearts of these people that are driving this are good. And this is using, and I value a lot about what Dr. Gabar Mate says as an addiction expert in his work. He worked downtown Eastside Vancouver, and if you know about addiction, that's the epicenter for everything that could go bad.
100%, yeah.
And so he was one of the first kind of cheerleaders behind that harm reduction model of safe injection sites, and that he was a driving force behind all of that. But it came out of this, and this is some of his stuff that says behind every addiction there's a story. Or the question, his quote is, the question is never why the addiction, the question is always where's the pain?
Yeah.
So he's recognizing that as he's working with these people in downtown Eastside Vancouver, he can see the pain, but as an atheist, he doesn't see the hope. And so he says, I want to care for them as much as we can in their state, and recognizing from his perspective as an expert that nothing's going to change this for them. So let's make life as comfortable as possible for them and as safe as possible for them. So out of that heart of compassion without hope comes started off as safe injection sites, and now it's safe supply, and it's going that direction. Yeah. Well, first started as this needle exchange and kind of worked its way into this, but it comes out of that compassionate heart, but with that part of, because we don't see any hope for these people. So our response is, we see hope for each of these individuals, but the hope has to come out of when they're in a place of sound mind, when they can own their pain and deal with that, which means they need to be in a place of sobriety to do that. And have that willingness. And so that's kind of the contrast between the two philosophies.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's a really fine line between a safe drug supply where, from a compassionate perspective, but does it prolong, on one side, maybe it prolongs them ever getting help because now they have a safe drug supply that they know won't kill them. The other side of it is, well, if they're getting street drugs, like, they could be dead tomorrow. And that is a tough, from a societal
it's more
question.
Like a palliative care, right? Yeah, so it's like somebody who's say they have terminal cancer, and they're just, like you said, making them comfortable. We don't stop praying, right? Like even if someone, how many anecdotal stories are there of people who are given 6 months to live with terminal cancer who are alive 15 years later? Sure. I mean, if that's where the whole, medically assisted in dying thing gets, in my mind, to be a little off the mark, where it does make sense rationally, but when you look at it irrationally, when you look at it from a point of faith, you say, well, wait a second, these things do happen. So it's kind of like the capital punishment, where is it worth having a death penalty if we execute one innocent person?
Well, I think you're on the border of those existential questions where the state doesn't want a higher power than the state. So if you roll out a MAID program and because that's what we do. You don't want people, governments don't like people believing in God.
That's
generally
probably
speaking.
True.
I would say by and large, they don't want that because they don't want to hire. They don't want to have to admit that they're not the authority on something.
Yeah, I'd agree. Power structures.
Maybe I'm kind of off the rails here going down that, but that becomes one of those.
Historically, that's accurate, I think.
Yeah. Now, speaking of our Alberta government, they are definitely pushing hard a recovery model. The social science, social work movement is pushing hard for harm reduction. And so it's creating a tension here where our government actually wants recovery-based models.
Yeah.
Right.
Our society is saying we want more of the safe supplies, safe injection sites, that stuff coming through. And so, yeah, we kind of live in that tension, whereas in BC, the government and the social system are moving in the same direction to do that. And now they're backing away from that. And down in Vancouver or BC government is going like, okay, we've done this and we find out, okay, tried it and it's not really working. So can we back out of it now? And so, yeah, it gets complicated.
For sure.
Yeah. Well, I've often thought that the government filled the gaps that the church left. When we looked at social programs, they were, 100, 200 years ago, those were filled by the church. It was, the religion looking after the widows and fatherless. So when we started to move into a more secular form of government, the government stepped in to take over the traditional roles of the church. And I think, we look at historically, a lot of attention has been paid to these tragic ends of programs run by the church. So we're either run by the Catholic Church or you look at the residential schools in Canada. Those same tragedies are happening now under the government. Like the foster care program is easily as bad, if not worse, than any of the residential school program ever was. So we've just let the government step in to fill these gaps. We let a bureaucracy fill what the community through the church did traditionally. So the idea that what you guys are doing, which seems to be a more community-based approach, because we don't want to take all those people in tent cities or who are living in addiction and just write them off. We need everyone. We need all of the people. So we need them back. We need them to become contributing, healthy members of society again. And it's fantastic that we can say we love them and we want to help them. So we're going to, pad the margins of society, like nerf it off so that it's not so bad. But I think that's just making us feel better. I don't think that's making them any better. So with your guys' approach to returning some dignity and some agency back to these people, when I say these people, and I talk about myself as one of these people, right? Because for me, I just had the good fortune where I didn't need a program like yours, but I know people who could have used it, who may need it now, and who died because they didn't have it. So I really love to see what you guys are doing, and what's you were talking about building a new facility. What's that look like? What's the future of the Rising Above ministry look like? Just
before I jump into that, I want to springboard off of what you're saying, because you quoted a couple of times that verse from James, that pure religion is this, to look after widows and orphans in their distress. And then it goes on to say, and to keep oneself from being polluted or corrupted by the world.
Right.
So there's those two things that God is asking from us. But you're right, and I've often said this, that we call it the separation of church and state. When the government took over the social service segment of our world, it was a bad day for the government, because we watch tax dollars just grow. And I don't have the numbers, but if you were to say, look at how much money did the province of Alberta spend 20 years ago on homelessness and addiction compared to what they're spending now, that has ballooned way beyond the rate of inflation.
Yeah.
And so the government's having to put more and more and more and more of our tax dollars into this and seeing minimal results.
Yeah.
So it was a bad day for the government when that happened. It was a bad day for the church when we gave that up. And I like how you said that, because I think the church did surrender that responsibility to be the social service network in our culture. because now the church is struggling with an identity issues of where do we fit in and what are we doing here, and then it was a really bad day for those who need the supports, because they're getting some financial assistance and some of this, safe supply stuff, but it's not really helping them deal with what's really going on at the heart. And that comes back to what the church can do. So if we can come back and say, let's take that back as a Christian-based ministry, let's come back to the root of that, we're going to accomplish something.
Well, I think that kind of goes back to what, in your program, you hold people accountable. The government isn't. They just throw money at the problem and it is what it is.
But we have the confidence to say there's hope.
Yeah.
And the hope isn't in us or our program or our model. The hope is in a God that cares for you, even if you don't feel like he's on your side, and help you get to that place. And so that's where the hope comes from.
Yeah.
But you're asking about the future. Yeah, we're going to be building a new building on our site that will allow us to bring our ladies from our 4 different residential houses, because they feel isolated. They're there for programming during the day, and then then they feel like they're going off and they don't feel as connected. So this brings them on site to the same campus as the men are. So actually, when we get the new building, the men will be moving into there, because there's going to be 36 beds in there, and the ladies will move into the 19 beds and we'll do some renovations in there. They'll move into there. So it'll all be on one site. The future rising above, though, is beyond Grand Prairie. We're starting in Fort St. John here in a month. We're starting in Peterborough, Ontario, as I mentioned before, in July. And we have a partnership agreement with Peerless Trout First Nation. And so we're up there 4 to 6 times a year doing some teaching and training with their people. We're their treatment center of choice for their people coming out of their First Nation who needs treatment. And so we see those kind of things growing in our future as well. So it's not just going to be a Grand Prairie standalone. It'll be using the model that we have and impacting it in a broader scale. So,
have you guys seen interest in that model from other organizations?
Yes, and that's where Fort St. John, of course, was close enough that they would hear about it quite a bit. Yeah. But a connections through Peterborough, conversation with somebody who works in the inner city, Peterborough, saying we need a faith-based addiction treatment program. And the person he was just basically pouring his heart out to knew me and says, let me connect you with somebody in Grand Prairie. And as soon as they heard our model, they came out here and they go, that's the model we want. And there's been interest from a few other places that are, So we will see what happens in the other places, adapt our model. And
right from the beginning when I started to talk about hope, it's easy for us, I think, in our society these days to get disconnected from each other, and disconnected a bit from our humanity. Faith in the church, by its nature, connects people. One of my favorite thoughts that I ever had were the answers to each other's prayers. So when we pray for strength or deliverance or whatever we're praying for, God sends angels in this form of people. He's like kind of puts people in our path, or puts people in our lives that are going to nudge us in one direction or another, and hopefully in the right way. Yep. But I think that's part of our responsibility, and I don't think that people really realize that there aren't too many hopeless situations.
No. And that's one of the value statements that we have, is that nobody's beyond hope. And that's our word. And we use it a lot. Actually, when I talked about our banquet is called the Hope Lives Banquet. And if you see our advertising, that's what you'll see, Hope Lives Banquet 2024. And so I often say, on paper, we're in the addiction treatment business, but in reality, we're in the hope business. Yeah. And bringing hope to those that have lost it, which are the ones that are escaping with addiction. So I often say we're actually in the hope business, and we believe nobody is beyond the scope of experiencing hope.
No, I don't think so. I think one of the greatest examples of that is in the Bible and in the trial of Jesus. Mm-hmm. You've got Pilate who says, well, on this day we're going to release a prisoner. Mm-hmm. We're gonna give back to the people one of your own, thinking that the people would call for the release of Jesus, and they call for the release of Barabbas, who was a murderer, who was by all certainty under the Roman Empire going to be killed by the state. Yeah. And in my mind, this is something I just kind of recently thought about, is God chose to free the murderer rather than his own son, rather than Jesus. That is the level of hope. That is the level of, we condemn ourselves a lot of the time with our ideas of, I've done all this wrong, I'm stuck in this addiction, I'm stuck in this life, I've made these bad decisions, I've done all these terrible things, I'm hopeless. But God doesn't see it that way.
David, I've said before, Rising Above as a pastor over 20 years, I've never heard that take on the release of Barabbas before, but I love it. That's really cool.
Yeah, just something about that struck me as these hopeless situations that just aren't so hopeless, because for him that was a hopeless situation.
Yeah, exactly.
But he ends up being delivered,
released, and a free man.
Yeah, exactly. So I think there's hope out there for all of us, and I love seeing what you guys are doing. I'm glad we had the chance to have this conversation with you. I hope this reaches a lot of people. We're a small podcast. We don't have a huge following, but we're trying to grow, and I hope this is. Yeah, I'm hoping that this is the kind of message that we can get out to people. Yeah. That there is hope.
For sure, and it's been a real pleasure to chat with you guys, Lucas and David. Thanks for including me and inviting me into this journey with you guys to talk about this. I deeply appreciate it.
I really appreciate getting to sit down with you. You are an absolute blessing to this community, and there's absolutely no doubt that you're doing God's work. So awesome.
Thanks, Lucas.
Yeah. Where can people find you guys online? Where can they donate? We talked a little bit earlier about your fundraisers.
Yep. Probably the simplest way to go for all of those things would be just our website, which is Rising Above GP for Grand Prairie. So risingabovegp.com. And you can find out everything you want to know on there. Like you said, you kind of scoped us out on there.
You betcha, yeah.
Yep.
We'll have a link in the description below.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. So if you feel like I need that program, you can apply online there, and it'll get sent to us immediately. If you want to donate, you can donate on there. So basically everything you need to know to find out more about Rising Above is on the website.
And you guys, you said you do one gala every year?
And March is our gala, and September is what we call our share-a-thon on the radio. And different organizations, especially different churches, will do their own little fundraising events, and the proceeds will come to us, and that kind of helps us out too. But yeah, we do those 2 events a year. So
That's great. I guess one of the last questions that I had is how much community engagement do you guys find with, do you guys work closely with mental health? Do you guys work closely with the RCMP and community policing as well?
Yeah, for sure with mental health and some of those other agencies that work along it, like Friendship Center, Salvation Army, Food Bank. And yeah, we have good connections with them. And RCMP, community policing are certainly aware of who we are, and when we need them, we feel like we're a priority to them, because they respond very quickly when they get a call from us, which doesn't happen very often, but it's nice to know that. Yeah, thankfully. But it's nice to know that when we do call, they take our call pretty seriously. And so, we know we got their support. The new deputy chief of police for the new Grand Prairie Police Department was at our banquet, and so they're excellent. We feel like we want to build a good relationship with the new community policing department that's coming in. So, yeah. We feel very supported by the other organizations and agencies in Grand Prairie. And even Grand Prairie City Council has been really a pleasure to work with. So the facility that we're in is actually owned by the city currently.
Right.
We're building a new building that we're paying for on that property. And we're coming to the terms where the Grand Prairie City Council is actually saying it would probably be easier for us, rather than to lease this to you for $1 a year, which they're doing.
Right.
Why don't we just give you the title? And we're going, okay.
Yeah.
And that makes it easier to build a building on when it's actually on our property. And so
100%.
And that's in the works now, and it'll probably be coming through the next city council meeting, or one of the next couple. And so, yeah, we've been deeply appreciated the support we've had from the community, as well as the county of Grand Prairie and the MD of Greenview. Our local municipalities have really stood with us.
Fantastic. Glad to hear it. And like I said, hopefully this podcast gets out into the community, and a few more people kind of get to know who you guys are and the work that you guys doing. I don't think that there's too many more noble causes in this day and age than what you guys are doing. There's so much despair, and I think we saw post-COVID, we saw these things get a little bit worse.
Yes.
Did you guys see a huge or an influx after that?
Yes. Yeah. The whole mental health addiction things went upscale quite a bit.
Yeah.
Through COVID and after COVID, it just changed. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not for the better.
No. And I've heard from quite a few people that even community engagement is less. So the community programs and stuff like that are just starting to come back this year.
Well, yeah. And in my world, the church world, where I'm very closely connected to several churches in town here. Yeah, it took a hit, and they're slowly starting to build back up again. But yeah, it affected so many layers of our social connections in the community. But definitely mental health addiction, alcohol use, took off crazy.
Well, it makes me feel good that there's people like yourself out there, that if someone was ever in the situation that I was in, 20 years ago, that there's a website they could go to, that there's someone they could call, that it isn't hopeless, and that there is an agency, a group out there, a ministry out there that's working on their behalf to bring hope to people. And I don't know if anybody who watches the podcast knows this, but all our guests get a book.
Oh,
so I've got a copy of my collection here that I'll sign for you.
Awesome! Thanks.
There's a sticker in the on the piece that I wrote, or the piece that I read today.
Good. Yeah, and that was a great piece.
No, more than grateful that you were able to come share this time with us and share your message.
Thank you very much. Well, for the opportunity to be here, but this was a nice surprise to get the book.
No, you're very welcome.
I looked at a couple of your podcasts, and I knew you always started off with some of your original poetry, and I thought that's very cool. But thank you so much for that, David.
It's well, I write a complete piece every day, and I said, what am I going to do? What am I going to do with all these things? I've written thousands of them, so I said, I guess I'm going to have to start putting them in books, and then that became the mechanism of the podcast. Because when I first started to conceive of what it would be, I thought, what can I do that's any different than the other 2 million podcasts in the world? So I figured I wrote all these things. We'll start with one of these and see where the conversation gets to. And
that's great. Yeah.
And breaks the ice a little bit. So
no, that's good. So again, thank you for the opportunity to be with you, to share our story of rising above. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been fantastic.
Absolutely.
Really appreciate you, Mel. So you can find us, the Grey Range Podcast, on YouTube. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. We're also on Spotify and Apple Podcast. And you can follow us on Instagram and X. Links will be in the description below. You can buy the book on Amazon and our website. Can we say
it's
that
in
now?
The works? Yeah.
Website's in the works after our last podcast with Jeremy there. So stay tuned for that. We'll announce that on all the socials when it happens. And
And there's a Facebook page now. We actually have a Facebook page. Facebook. Jeremy brought it to my attention that he couldn't find the Facebook page because it didn't exist. So
that's something.
Now it exists.
Right on.
Thank you so much, Mel.
My
we
pleasure.
appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
God bless.
Thank you.
Stay safe out there.
All right.
This is the Grey Range Podcast. Out.